In the main square at the entrance to the gate, a man read a name, Russell Raymond. He looked closely at the wooden data plate. The man raised an eyebrow skeptically, assessing the appearance of the owner of this sign. The guard recognized this last name, which was known in the founding family, meaning this guy was an aristocrat. But something about all this didn't add up. It seemed strange. The guard looked at Russell's torn pieces of cloth and wondered what was wrong with his clothes. However, he said that everything was fine, so the guy could pass. The dark-haired man was surprised and asked the first one if he knew this guy. And the guard replied that the hero was from the founding family. Raymond, passing through the gate, heard the guard complaining about why he was dressed like that, including discussions about how his family was apparently not that important, and the guy probably came here to become a mercenary, which looked funny. An aristocrat, and also a mercenary. The protagonist's red eyes glinted in the sun, his chestnut hair fluttered along with his tattered robe, and the guy's face was covered in bruises and dirt. He sighed and chuckled, looking towards the guards who were talking too much. To Raymond, they were nothing more than pieces of shit. The boy walked into the city and looked up at the Tower of Magic, where all the defenders of the kingdom were located. One day he also worked hard to get into it, so that the hero's family is not destroyed. After his father died in the war against the Empire, they had to flee the castle. Russell had to get into the Tower of Magic to get their lands back. The little boy turned around and screamed, calling for his mother, and there was chaos of fire and ash all around. He cried, asking to stop, because his mother was left there, and a ring with a yellow eye instead of a precious stone hung on a chain around the child's neck. Getting into the tower was the hero's pipe dream, but he was expelled from the academy before he could even apply for a place there. He stood in his academic robes, head down, as he was reprimanded. The hero received 3 fails, which was the first such case in the history of the academy. The man said that Russell may be good in theory, but he can't even make it to the second round. Therefore, it would be difficult for him to withstand the narrowing of the mana veins, so he was offered to try himself in something else. Little Raymond clutched his shirt, his chest tightening at the mention of the constriction of his mana veins. He was born with thin and weak mana veins, could only take in so much and could not release it at all. For a magician, this is tantamount to a death sentence. However, during his career as a mercenary, Russell somehow managed to reach the second round. The guy smiled desperately, looking at his hands, realizing that he was still a third-rate magician. The white doors of the tower swung open. The man in white said that they had finished registering for temporary work today, so people could return. Naturally, this did not suit the people. The men began to be indignant that they had waited half a day. What were they supposed to do now? However, they had no choice. And Russell, who had also come here to register, thought about it. He heard someone say that the museum was looking for temporary mages, so he might as well go there. They were looking for first circle mages to clean up. And the hero looked up at the magnificent building that had just been illuminated by the sun. Russell, who was too tired and probably hadn't eaten for a long time, with dark circles under his eyes, sighed heavily. He rummaged in his pockets and pulled out a small bag containing 1 gold coin. So he decided to look into the Great Museum, where visitors were given a tour, saying that their museum was the largest among all the kingdoms. The man said that they would be receiving aristocrats this week, so everything had to be perfect. Raymond watched intently as the man in white gloves used magic to unlock the doors. He told the people, including the protagonist, to remember the power of the wind when they used air purification. And if they damage anything, then they should be prepared for the consequences, which the man stated menacingly, turning over his shoulder. The hero thought, what difference does it make? All these exhibits are fakes anyway. The man is clearly being dramatic. However, the guy continued to walk along with everyone else, listening to this uninteresting story. Suddenly he stopped at one of the doors. This place looked familiar to him. The guy read the name on the sign. It said that this was a room with fantastic views. Suddenly, something vibrated in Russell's pocket, and a slight glow crept through his clothes. The guy noticed yellow flashes coming from his pocket. He stuck his hand in there, not understanding why it vibrated. That same ring with the dragon's eye literally sparkled. It was his mother's ring, which she passed on to her son. The hero looked up again at the sign hanging above the tightly closed doors. His body moved on its own. He pushed open those doors while the group of people he had come with to apply for the job walked ahead. The guy stepped forward as if fate itself was pulling him. The man immediately noticed that one person from the group was missing. He shouted his name, but the hero was already standing in the hall with the rarest exhibits. The vibration of the ring became stronger as he approached the dragon's bones. The boy asked the ring if it wanted to tell him something, asked his mother to tell him, as if she could communicate with him through it. Russell closed his eyes to concentrate, and this brought him back to memories of when he was little, and his mother had already been to this museum. Then the child held her hand and smiled joyfully at everything new he saw. But what struck him most was something outside this hall. Raymond's eyes opened suddenly. He followed the corner he had just remembered and found the exhibit there, kept behind strong glass. There, in the blue box, lay the ancient heart of a dragon. The guy looked at the ring, which sparkled again. It was more than a coincidence. Dragon hearts and a ring in the shape of a dragon's eye. The hero put the ring on his index finger and asked it why it was crying. He asked why his mother brought him here. And when Russell put the jewelry on, for some reason it no longer vibrated. The exhibit, kept behind hard glass, lit up and there was silence all around. The boy had his back to the dragon's heart so he didn't see it, but his ring flashed again. Then Raymond sighed, thinking that he must have imagined it. He wanted to say that he really was so pathetic, because many years had passed since the last time he saw his mother. Suddenly the ring began to glow in a way it had never glowed before, and electrical discharges appeared in the air, right around the guy's fingers and hand. The entire hall was illuminated by a bright light, and the sound of flapping wings was heard, followed by a voice saying that the heart and eye had met, so the second eye was opening. The dragon that appeared told Russell that he could become the stumbling block of the new mythology. Raymond looked helplessly but steadily at this winged creature that had decided to give him a second chance. That's when the hero realized that the world was not standing still, and he made a breach, and the long-awaited fate finally began. A system window appeared before his eyes with an inscription that the divine eye was checking the world's data. The system and Victor Russell Raymond's mission launched, and then silence and darkness, as if the world had never existed. Raymond was called, but he did not understand where the noise was coming from, and this voice sounded angry. But for some reason, he recognized it. The teacher coughed and sharply hit the student on the head with a thick book. The boy in the academic robe suddenly jumped up from his seat. The man said he knew Russell had excellent grades, but how could he have the guts to fall asleep in his class? Raymond couldn't utter a word. Professor Hubert was standing in front of him, but this couldn't be, because he was dead. The boy's eyes quickly darted to the side. The blonde guy sitting in front started to worry, saying out loud what was going on with Russell. Then the hero's gaze darted in the other direction. To his right sat the bullies, who were barely able to contain their laughter so as not to let it out to the entire class. The guy still didn't understand what was going on here. Then he lowered his head and saw that he was wearing an academy student's suit. He immediately grabbed his face, checking to see if it had changed. Russell looked ahead in fear, not believing it, because right now he was in the past. All these events had already happened. In the brightly lit classroom, he stood silently, trying to take in what was happening, while the teacher waited for some kind of explanation. The professor said it was unlike Russell, but he would still be punished, and the man ordered the student to get out. He pushed him out the door and slammed it behind him, causing the boy to almost trip. Raymond saw a yellow shadow of his real self, who was no longer there. The guy thought about whether this kind of magic could even be called magic. He remembered the dragon's instructions, which said that the hero would become a stumbling block for the new mythology, so he must behave appropriately. He was told for sure that this was a second chance, but the ring on his finger had disappeared somewhere. The boy was wondering if his mother had helped him, when suddenly the doors behind him opened. The professor was indignant, telling Russell that he usually did not fall asleep in class, and the hero obediently bowed and asked for forgiveness. Hubert said they would need to talk face to face, so have Russell come to his office after lunch. The young man replied that he understood, and the teacher went ahead, saying that he would wait. It had been a long time since Raymond had been in trouble, but he still enjoyed the circumstances, and he watched as his old teacher walked away down the corridor, his hands folded behind his back. Suddenly, Russell felt a strong pain in his head and was pulled to the floor. Someone shouted at him. He wanted to be indignant out of habit, asking like, what kind of fucking bastard did this? The bullies smirked, asking who the fuck was there. The short-haired blonde man swung his hand, yelling at Russell that the idiot was too relaxed. His wrist was suddenly intercepted, preventing him from making a strike. The guy with freckles made the remark only because the professors were watching. He looked at Russell and said that he told him to make notes for him, but Raymond started snoring. The hero couldn't believe his eyes. In front of him was the biggest bully from the past, Coma Frederica. Frederick told Russell that if he didn't want to die, he should follow him to the toilet. The young man smiled awkwardly, seeing how the group of guys went to the toilet. He remembered that this had happened to him before. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of the hero, in which there was a task. To avoid bullying and teach these bullies a lesson, at the bottom the reward was described. Russell thought it was an illusion, and put his fingers through the blue window and his hand went right through. However, this window did not disappear anywhere, and the young man hesitantly tried to convince himself that he was imagining it. His eyes froze, when suddenly someone shouted at him, asking what he was doing and whether he was coming. Koma shouted if Russell knew that there was no point in running away since they were at the academy. And then he grinned widely, adding that if the guy was scared, he should try to run away. The hero's gaze was directed straight at this bully, as if he were a target. He didn't care about the mission. He wanted to teach these guys a lesson first. After years of living as a mercenary, this situation was a trifle. Unlike the bloodlust of those monsters that had to be killed at the risk of their lives. Russell found the guys already waiting for him in the restroom funny. Koma, smoking a pipe, teased the hero, saying that the bastard had finally deigned to come. Russell nodded in response, calling the freckled bully a bedbug. The blonde shouted that Raymond had gone crazy. He ran forward, swinging his fist hard, and shouted, "Does Russell really want to get it?" But the main character dodged, and the blow landed in the air. The blonde only had time to shift his gaze and notice Raymond's approaching face. Russell suddenly hit the guy in the stomach with his knee, drooling from the blonde's mouth, and he fell, flying back, causing the other bully to freeze. Brunner jumped up and started screaming, calling the hero a piece of fucking trash. But his attempts to stand up for his comrade were unsuccessful. Russell hit him in the face too. So the bully fell, hitting his head, and Frederick watched this with interest. He smirked at what was happening. And then he threw the pipe with tobacco aside, noting that Russell could not use magic, so he decided to learn cheap martial arts. He said that this was to be expected from a fallen family. Koma put a green glowing knuckle duster on his hand, saying that magic cannot be used within the academy building. He chuckled, continuing that Russell apparently didn't know that they were allowed to use small artifacts. The boy was in front of the hero's face in an instant, screaming for the brat to die. However, Russell stood still as the fist came flying towards him. The hero put his hand out and stopped the blow. Koma's arm, from his wrist to his shoulder, began to tremble with pain. Raymond pressed down on the bully's arm, literally twisting it backwards. A sharp pain pierced the guy, and he could not do anything, neither move nor strike again. Unable to bear it any longer, Frederick fell to his knees and bent over. He said that Russell had been outranked by his brothers, and even his family had turned a blind eye to a shit-eater like him, adding that if the enemy was strong, then you had to act slowly, and if he was weak, then mock him. The hero became furious and called the offender a pathetic nobody. Raymond's eyes glowed yellow, and the whites turned black as he asked how someone like Frederick dared mention his family. The freckled boy, seeing these eyes, was frightened. Cold drops of sweat ran down his face. Only now did he come to his senses and asked Russell to wait, to stop when he swung his fist. However, now it was the hero's turn to strike, and his fist landed next to Koma's temple. One blow was enough. Russell headed for the exit and finally told Frederick to behave well from now on. The red-haired offender was the only one who didn't lose consciousness, but he didn't have the strength to get up. The hero added that he should behave well, if only he wasn't tired of living. Russell walked down the corridor, and when he leaned against the wall, his legs could no longer support him. He closed his eyes, wondering if he had gone too far. His eyes were tired, his eyelids were sticking together, but his eye sockets had regained their usual color, and a system window appeared in front of the guy. From there, a lower magic stone that was being absorbed flew into his palm. Looking at the red ruby, the hero grimaced, wondering if they really wanted him to eat it. Russell sat on the floor and looked at the stone from different sides for some time. He thought that even savages did not eat stones. But at the thought that it might help, the young man brought it to his mouth. This could be as good an opportunity for him as going back in time. The taste of the magic stone was very good. Russell suddenly began to emit a red-orange glow, and then everything around him flared up, engulfing him in it, which made the hero afraid. A notification came that he had absorbed the mana inside the stone, which in turn was being absorbed right now. At some point, Raymond began to have difficulty breathing, and he clutched his shirt with his hand, closing his eyes. He felt the mana coming out of the stone and being absorbed by his heart, spreading through his veins. The young man kept his eyes closed, feeling the changes in his body. He tried to restore his breathing. Luckily for him, the effects of the mana gradually subsided. Russell was delighted, deciding that in this way, he would definitely be able to overcome the narrowing of the mana veins. After all, everything he went through, the decline of his family, his expulsion from the academy, can change. This life of a third-rate mercenary mage can turn in a completely opposite direction. And Russell, confident in his abilities, walked further down the corridor. He knocked on the professor's office door and apologized, and he invited him in. A man holding a cup of tea in his hand invited the student to sit down. Professor Hubert told Russell that he was not himself today. He asked if the student had encountered any difficulties. Rumors reached him that the hero's classmates were bullying him. Raymond remembered that in his past life this man had not abandoned him until the very end. He smiled, deciding to say what he had always wanted. And looking at the teacher, he said that he shouldn't worry. The professor's eyes widened in surprise when the young man thanked him. The man coughed awkwardly, saying that as a professor, he had to keep an eye on the students. He added that, despite this, Russell dozed off in class, for which he should be punished. The professor pushed the book towards the boy and said that it would not be easy. His assignment was to write an analytical report from page 62 to 74 on the topic of studying the elements. He added that even older students have difficulty with this section. And while he was saying this, the system window appeared in front of the hero again. The hero was surprised that the lessons also counted as a mission, because it said to complete the professor's task, for which a reward was due. The professor chuckled, asking what was the matter. Would it really be too hard? However, Russell said he could handle it and thanked Professor Hubert. The hero sat with the book until sunset, until the golden rays of the sun penetrated into his room. The job seemed easy to him. He remembered how, due to his hopeless abilities in the past, he carefully studied the theory to compensate for his shortcoming. He did not stop studying even when he was a mercenary. The young man got up from the table and went to the window. He thought that there was something in this life that was no less important to him than his studies, namely, training of mana veins. Veins are what the path of mana itself passes through. It is absorbed through the breath, circulates through the veins, and collects in the heart. Russell remembered his days as a mercenary, when he had to fight monsters, including a huge scorpion. He attacked the hero furiously, raising sand and pushing the guy into a corner, so that at times he was unable to deflect the blows. Due to the blood circulation, reverse mana was released and the boy was able to strike back. Using various methods, the boy pushed the monster away with a fire spell, but the scorpion proved stronger. And the stronger the mage's veins were, the more mana could be collected and released. However, Russell was not enough, and the monster pushed the hero away with its tail when he let his guard down. His veins were too thin and weak, so he crashed into a column. Raymond left a huge dent and even lost consciousness for a while. Suddenly, the stone cracked and a hole formed behind it, into which the boy fell. But it seemed as if the heavens had taken pity on the hero's unfortunate fate, or he had simply been lucky. He fell into some underground place, in which something was shining brightly, and with difficulty the guy raised himself up on his elbows. Having caught his breath, Russell raised his still dim gaze to the source of the purple shimmer. It was a historical site of unknown origin, hidden between two grimoires. The guy reached for the sacred books, one of which was called The Body of the Wizard, and the other, Above the Veins. It said that instead of veins, the magician should train the body and expand the veins of mana. So, remembering this, Russell ran into the yard and began to do push-ups, the wizard's body replacing muscle tissue with particles of mana veins. He then climbed a tree and began doing push-ups while hanging from a thick branch to strengthen his body, thereby making his veins stronger. In the adult body, the changes were minor, but while the hero is still growing, he can achieve great results. And this thought motivated Russell to work out with all his might. He decided that this time he would overcome the narrowing of the veins. So the hero worked for some time and stopped at a tree, breathing heavily. He thought that he could not do it anymore. However, he did quite a lot, and when he was about to stop, a window appeared in front of him with the task of running 5 kilometers. He was indignant that it had not surfaced before, but now it had. Then another one appeared, and another one with explanations of how this task could be completed. And then the hero asked why there was such a rush. Russell pursed his lips into a smile, replying that he would go for a run. The guy realized that he had miraculously received this opportunity, so now he could not sit idle. So Raymond ran first 1.5 kilometers, then 2 and 7, and then his legs began to shake and give way. Almost at the 4th kilometer, he checked the system window and realized that he had run almost all the way. His strength was running out. He stopped in the middle of the yard and leaned his hands on his half-bent knees, thinking that there was just a little more left. And without delay, Russell rushed forward, feeling the tension throughout his body. At the end of the run, the boy fell on the grass and looked at the system window, which was about to give him a reward. The young man could not take a step. He smiled, not understanding how he was supposed to get back to the dorm, but he didn't know that he was being watched at that moment. The red-haired guy chuckled, telling himself that Russell Raymond was wasting his time. Professor Hubert could not believe that Russell had come to such a profound conclusion in his analysis, using only academic-level textbooks. He asked if Raymond had really prepared this report. The boy replied that yes, he could take an oath on mana to confirm this. Hearing this, the teacher looked at the student, thinking that he looked too confident to make such statements and even smile. The man replied that he was extremely pleased with the young man's work. And then the reward notification window popped up in front of the hero again. He realized that the higher his level of understanding, the more he would stop. The professor said that the student had worked hard and could go, but Russell was in no hurry. He turned to Hubert with a request, and the man looked questioningly at the student. It was so that Russell could use the professor's library. The teacher asked why he wanted it. He explained that the library for students should have enough books for the needs of the young man, and then Russell replied that he had already read them all. The professor leaned back in his chair and sighed, admitting that he was amazed. But even if the student was telling the truth, access to the professor's library was a different matter. The teacher said that he needed to test Raymond's knowledge. The hero smiled with understanding. Ultimately, Professor Hubert gave the hero too much work, and multiple system notifications told him that he had to do it. However, he understood that the better his understanding of theory, the stronger his magic. And Russell was determined that he must at any cost obtain knowledge from the professor's library. The young man uncorked a glass jar of water and took a few sips. He understood that it would be difficult, but since he had the opportunity to get a mana stone for completing the mission, he would kill 2 birds with 1 stone. While he was thinking about this in the shade of a tree, his name was called. It was a guy named Anton Friedrich. He said he was told it was Russell's punishment, but didn't he think he was too obsessed with training? He added that his friend suffered because of Raymond. The hero asked what was the matter. Had he really come for revenge? The guy was surprised, ironically asking again whether he and revenge were compatible, and the red-haired man's entourage grinned. He told Russell to stop raving, because who would take revenge on trash like him? He stated that it would be enough for him to trample Raymond's work. Anton touched the guy with his shoulder, and turning around, said that they would see each other in class. One of the guys asked if Frederick was about to trample him, and Anton replied that there were no spectators. The hero immediately understood what lesson was being discussed. This is a class where grades are given based on sparring and matches, the study of magical combat. And this is the subject on which Russell was always humiliated. The guy couldn't believe that, like a fool, he had forgotten about this student. So Raymond decided to prepare well this time so as not to fall flat on his face. A mission to reach the second circle appeared in the system window, and the hero began to study hard. In addition to the theoretical material, he trained constantly and worked hard. He carried out Professor Hubert's orders to such an extent that he could not utter a word. Ultimately, Russell received a decent amount of mana stones for completing these missions. However, when he reached out his hand to them, he was afraid that he would be able to handle such a volume. There was fear and uncertainty in his eyes, so the young man closed his eyes to give himself time to prepare. And in a moment he began to bite off stone after stone, deciding to simply trust in the training he had been doing for so long. At first, nothing happened. But after a while, the young man's shoulders were again engulfed in flames. This energy flared up with such force that it barely had time to dissipate. Raymond felt as if his whole body was on fire. The pupils of his eyes disappeared, and they began to be filled with a fiery glow. The young man's legs gave way. He thought that he had to do it faster. Russell covered his face with his hand, trying to concentrate to contain the flow of mana. He pressed his hand to his chest, feeling how his heart was pumping blood at a furious speed at that moment. The guy clenched his teeth tightly. His main goal was to turn this flow and create a new circle. Russell froze, thinking that if he didn't succeed, his heart would simply stop. He exhaled slowly, gradually taking control of this energy, because the guy had already decided everything. The hero closed his eyes and stretched his arms forward, as if embracing this magical flow. It grew with every second in the form of a magic ball. And just when Russell thought he would have it at any cost, a pillar of fiery power shot out from him, its beam passing through the window under the night sky. The guy hanging in the air felt that he had succeeded. This second circle appeared above the young man's chest in the form of a special pictogram. Russell's consciousness began to blur and his eyelids closed on their own, rolling his eyes back. The hero fell flat on the floor, arms spread out, fire discharges and smoke hovered around him. The power of magic was significantly increased. The professor couldn't believe that Russell had completed all his assignments. He said he had one last question. He looked straight at the student, deciding to ask more deeply about the basics, a question that was closer to the truth. Russell waited anxiously, his hand clenched into a fist, and the teacher asked him to name the most important of the 4 constituent elements of magic. The young man looked at the teacher with wide eyes and open mouth, and silence reigned. Hubert remembered that he was asking a question that he himself had only recently been able to explain to his student. Then the teacher suddenly stood up and said that he would ask another question. But Russell wanted to say the answer, and the professor froze. It seemed unreal to him that the student knew the answer to a question that he himself had only recently learned. The hero looked into the professor's eyes and replied that it was a mental image. The professor adjusted his pince-nez and, hesitating slightly, asked why the student thought so. Then Russell looked at his palm and answered slowly and thoughtfully. He said that magic is the creation of something using mana, which is divided into 4 levels. This is a simulation in which one can study natural phenomena, a mental image that allows one to imagine what one has learned, also creating formulas to transform them into a visual image and manifestation using formulas, which allows you to manifest magic in the real world. Raymond added that understanding, creating, and manifesting can be learned with enough effort, but mental imagery cannot be influenced through training. Going beyond one's own limitations and achieving freedom of imagination through courage is what determines the level of mental imagery. The student decided to tell the story using the example of such an element as fire. If he imagines that there is an arrow in front of him, he will use the magic of the second circle, a fire arrow. And Russell introduced her. He said that if he imagined something different, he would create a different spell. And if you don't limit your imagination at all, the hero can come up with some kind of miracle, something that does not exist in this world. The professor listened attentively to the student. He was amazed because the answer turned out to be correct. A fiery light danced in Raymond's hand. He compressed it, giving the example of a shadow into which the sun or hot ice shines. It all starts with understanding the world, but ends with the confusing rules of the universe. This was exactly the definition of magic, and the guy, having finished his speech, looked at the professor. The man smiled and said that as he thought, the student library was too small for this student. After this, Russell received a notification granting him access to the first floor of the professor's library. When the hero entered the library, the first floor seemed simply enormous to him. The professor's library was different from the student's. He took books on the ballistic trajectory of three-dimensional magic and advanced botany. When I opened them, I was glad that they were practical. Moreover, the material did not omit the basics of the theory of magic. And while Russell sat, running his eyes over the desired lines to which he had gained access, a female figure in high heels appeared not far from him. She walked up to him and gasped. The woman said that he had picked up an interesting book. Hearing this voice, the guy became scared and turned sharply in his chair, his hands tensed. However, when he looked to the side, there was no one behind him, and the woman, who was already in another place, asked him to look where she was standing, calling Russell a baby. This stately woman in an elegant outfit and with an extravagant hat and cane was a professor. Her name was Daria Snow White, and she smiled as she looked at the hero. The young man quickly rose from his chair and bowed to her, saying that he was pleased to meet the head of the fire tower, and he gave his name. And then he looked at the woman, who was one of the people of the Eighth Circle. Few in the world have managed to reach such a level. Even though she was over 80, she spent an incredible amount of mana to maintain her youthful appearance, and that tower was the best among the Red Magic Tower faction. The woman was surprised that he knew her, and while the hero was overcome with doubts about why this professor came here, she told the student that there was no need to worry, adding that she was just a partner who was going down the same path as him. Daria then handed Russell a round lollipop. He took it and immediately put it in his mouth, tasting the sweetness. The woman asked how the student was able to gain access to the professor's library. Russell tensed slightly, took the lollipop out of his mouth and replied that Professor Hubert had given him permission. Daria sighed and smirked, looking over her shoulder at the young man. She was amazed that the wary man had given him permission. She then said that Russell had been studying a rather interesting subject. I noticed that the student had extremely pure mana, and its distribution was also stable. Her eyes glowed blue. Daria could read the amount of mana. Suddenly she asked how dare Russell. The boy was afraid that she had noticed something, but the woman walked around the student and told him not to worry because she was not there to lecture. The hero turned his head towards her, and hesitating slightly, he thanked the woman. Then Professor Daria hit the floor with her cane, and concentrated energy began to emanate from the floor. The woman wished the student to become the best with all his might, calling him baby again, and disappeared into thin air. The hero froze with the lollipop in his hand, and with wide eyes watched the particles of magic floating in the air, thanks to which the woman was able to leave the room with such ease. As he left the professor's library and closed the door behind him, he said out loud that he had never even thought that they would meet here. It was a surprise to him when suddenly someone behind him recognized Russell and asked another if he was there. The guy turned around and saw a bunch of bullies who were clearly unhappy with the hero leaving the professor's library. Like, who does he think he is? Frederick chuckled, saying that Russell had simply kissed someone's ass, but he would still never amount to anything. The others laughed, and the red-haired man, leaving, told him with a grin that Raymond should try his best. He added that there would be no use in it, but these words only provoked the hero. A day later, the study of magical combat began right in the arena. The manager said that the first person whose name is called will go to the stadium and choose his opponent. Usually the professors would pick the weak students, which was necessary so that they would choose a suitable opponent for themselves. and some in the arena laughed, looking towards Russell. Because in his past life, he was always the first to be called. The guys were sure that he would be the first to be called, because he had narrow mana veins, and they started yelling at the hero to choose them as his opponent, because they needed to improve their grades this semester. The leader in the arena shouted for silence and said that he would now choose a student. Imagine the surprise of the children when the name of the first student was Anton Friedrich. He began to descend the stairs to the stadium, and everyone around him whispered in confusion about why he was the first. The professor in glasses, holding the lists of students, walked into the shadows, and Frederick grinned, heading towards the center of the arena. As he passed the man, he thanked him for calling him first. The professor replied that this was a trifle compared to the favors of the trade association. Russell, who had been watching Frederick walk out onto the pitch, thought he had known it would turn out this way. Anton looked at the stands and shouted to the hero, asking why he was sitting there, and called him to come down to him. And he shouted Raymond's name very loudly so that everyone could hear. Professor Hubert sat in his office, sipping tea, and asked Daria to warn him in advance of her visits. She crossed her arms over her chest and looked out the window, watching the stadium full of academy students. She sat down in a chair and said that everything was fine. The teacher had just come to visit his student. The woman took the mug of tea and asked if he had given Russell access to the professor's library. Hubert replied that yes, and asked excitedly if Raymond had done something wrong. Daria said that no. She just hadn't seen something so rare for a long time. The professor lowered his head in agreement, adding that Russell's mana flow disease was quite rare on their continent. Snow White called her student Hubert a fool, explaining that the child had surpassed his limit. The professor tensed up. He didn't understand what was being discussed, and the woman explained that Russell had already reached the second circle. The hero saw a system window with the task of winning a training match. In return, he was offered a storage facility, and this was magic accessible only to the richest magician, where it was convenient to store mana stones. Anton turned to Russell, calling him an insect, and asked why he was frozen. And then he said that if he wanted to live, then he should beg him for mercy. Russell chuckled as he asked again. He looked straight at Frederick with a worried expression as he released his mana energy. Feeling this aura and seeing Raymond surrounded by fire, the bully was scared. He didn't know what kind of magic it was. The manager announced that the match was starting, and from the very first seconds, the main character formed a fireball in his hand. Anton was angry because as a person with narrow mana veins, it simply couldn't be. He didn't hesitate and immediately used the fire throw of the second circle magic towards Raymond. The guy froze, seeing the fire flying rapidly towards him. At the very last moment, Russell swung his hand, placing the shield in front of him. The commission applauded the hero for this tonic shield at an angle, which protected from the heat. The bespectacled professor who announced the first student was shocked that Russell Raymond had been hiding his powers all this time. Anton's body felt tense as he held back the fire throw, frustrated and surprised that the guy had held up. Frederick's magical power gradually began to fade, and the hero, noticing this, decided to act now. He also used the second circle magic, the fire arrow that he told Professor Hubert about, and swinging, he threw it forward with force. Anton, who kept his hand on the fireball, almost got caught. The red-haired boy crossed his arms in front of him to form a shield, still not believing that Russell had reached the second circle. This fiery stream enveloping the arrow was so strong that Anton's hands were shaking. He continued to call Raymond an insect. Seeing Russell's look, he thought it was nonsense, that the guy had already managed to create a second arrow. 3 large-tipped arrows flew straight at Frederick, who had erected a dome-shaped defense. The professor in glasses was amazed that it was really a double creature, and the man next to him said that he was not sure. He thought it wasn't it, but that Russell was just casting spells quickly. Frederick decided that the arrow of fire was all that Raymond could do. Then he concentrated and activated a red shield against the fire. This is just what the hero was waiting for, and Frederick was glad that if he attacked when Raymond ran out of mana, he would definitely win. However, at the very last moment, the protagonist canceled the spell, and the fiery arrows were reduced to streams of wind. Anton screamed he didn't expect this. The hero then jumped into the air and sent an arrow of wind at his opponent's shield, and the bully was unable to stay on his feet. The teachers were unsure if this was really the Russell they knew. The shield around Anton dissipated, and the boy bent over from the weight in his body. His hair was disheveled, his face was sweaty, and there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. And at that moment, when Frederick was inactive, Russell ran up to him, clenching his fist. The hero's opponent wanted to summon lightning, but didn't have time. He received a powerful blow right to the solar plexus. Anton's eyes rolled back. He couldn't do anything. His body twisted, and drool came out of his mouth. The redhead raised his finger to use the second circle's fire. But Russell didn't let him do this and attacked again, hitting him in the face. The professor in glasses started shouting about whether this was magic and demanded that the fight be stopped immediately. But Professor Hubert was calm. He watched Raymond with a smile, asking the professor to take a closer look at what surrounded Russell's body. The man in glasses concentrated his vision on the main character's body. Indeed, Russell used mana as an aura. Hubert said he didn't know how, but Raymond found a way. And, not wanting to give up, the hero delivered another blow to Anton's face. So much so that he not only couldn't stand, but flew back into the stadium wall with his back and the fence cracked. The students, who were expecting a spectacle of Russell's humiliation, gaped and froze. There was only one question in the professor's head: how? Hubert asked him what he was doing, and the man turned his gaze to the teacher. He smiled, saying that he had to announce the winner. The professor hesitated, said yes, and then raised his hand. The professor shouted that Russell Raymond had won. Coming down from the podium, the man told the hero that he had tried hard and could now go. Russell replied that it was not over yet, and the professor asked what he was talking about. The rules stated that until the winner gave up, he could challenge the next opponents, and the entire stadium filled with students' jaws dropped. Raymond raised his finger and pointed at one of the students, shouting that he would now go out into the stadium. A window appeared in front of the hero with a mission to win a training match. Russell playfully told the guy to come to him. Ultimately, the protagonist won 14 times in a row. Hubert thought that Professor Daria had amazing insight, because after seeing Russell just once, she saw potential in him. However, the man couldn't comprehend how his student had grown so quickly. He recalled Russell's attacks with a serious expression, trying to wrap his mind around it and analyze it. After the shower, the guy saw a window that notified him about receiving the storage and automatic collection of rewards in it. Russell didn't immediately understand how it worked, when suddenly a purple sphere appeared in front of him. The character extended his hand there, and he took out a long map from there. Then immediately came the notification about the first mission, which said to go to the place indicated on the map after reaching the magic of the third circle, and complete the task received there, and upon arrival, the light will show the way. Russell tensed up. He was overcome with doubts, because in his past life he had failed to create the third circle of magic. Would he be able to do it now? Besides, he didn't understand what this place indicated on the map was. It was completely incomprehensible. Then he decided to use the professor's laboratory to find out where he needed to go. He took out a large number of books in search of a clue, and he decided to start with the outer territories of the kingdom of Endymion. Then the young man began to study the seas of the empire. After reading several books and still finding nothing, Russell smiled nervously, hoping the next one would cover the outer seas. However, none of the dozens of books he read suited him. The hero cursed because he had spent too much time on this. Then he decided to create a third circle first. Raymond looked up at the hallway and saw everyone around him whispering excitedly about him. Of course, winning the training match allowed him to get rid of the bullying. But he was still a loner, and the thought made him smile. Suddenly the hero was called, and he turned around questioningly. Professor Hubert placed his hand on the student's shoulder, asking if he would come in to see him for a minute. Russell smiled and replied, "Yes, of course." In the office, the teacher poured tea into cups again, said that summer holidays would soon begin, and asked if the hero had any plans. The man placed the tea on a saucer next to Russell, when the boy replied that there were no plans yet. The professor then asked if the student would like to work on a research project. He added that depending on Raymond's work, the student's name might be right after his, and asked what he thought about that. The character took one of the magazines and froze. His eyes widened in surprise. Professor Hubert asked Russell what he was thinking about. The student apologized and admitted that she actually had something planned. The man raised an eyebrow since Russell had just said he had no plans. Smiling, Raymond handed the journal to the professor, saying that he was going there. The magazine mentioned a holiday in the Maldives. And indeed, the hero got into the carriage immediately after the announcement of the holidays, and headed there. That conversation with the professor helped him understand the markings on the map. Raymond was calm and contented. He knew that he was gradually moving towards his goal. He had quite a long way to go, so he decided to have a snack, sticking his hand into the storage room. His strength was replenished by magic stones that caused the mana level to increase. One of these was enough for him for now. The coachman wiped the sweat from his forehead with his hand, surprised that the summer was somehow hot this year, which was strange. But it was not the summer that was to blame for this heat, but Russell, from whom fire was coming through the doors of the carriage. The boy closed his eyes, concentrating so that his heart could successfully endure the absorption of the stone and the expansion of the veins. Russell set himself the goal of creating a third circle before arriving. Hubert found it strange that the hero also went to the Maldives, but he thought it was even good, because Professor Daria Snow White was there right now. She admired the views of the beach and sipped a cocktail. This place was her home. The woman could not remember the last time she had a vacation. All the time she had to protect the empire and conduct research, and also teach students. Every year she organized special lessons, gathering all the students. He said that the numbers 9, 6, and 3 have special meaning for magicians. The students watched with interest and excitement as the professor demonstrated her skills to them. She showed them the most ancient illustrations, explaining that these numbers represented the end of the 9th circle magician, the end of the 6th circle path, and the torment to become a higher magician. And the 3rd circle showed the development of the magician himself as an individual. Daria crossed her arms over her chest, remembering her lectures about the 3rd circle, and wondered if that baby was okay. Namely, Russell Raymond, whom she met in the professor's library. When the carriage arrived at the place, the driver came to the door, telling the sir that he could get out, but the boy did not open the door. Then the gray-haired man got scared and shouted to him through the closed window of the carriage. Upon arrival, the hero ordered a large number of dishes and devoured the food with great appetite. He had spent too much energy trying to calm the raging mana. Now it needed to be replenished. The boy brought a mug of drink to his mouth, remembering how the coachman had pulled him out of the carriage while he was unconscious. But he was finally able to achieve the magic of the 3rd circle, which he literally glowed with. Russell didn't think he could surpass his past self in a few months. But this was not enough, and with these thoughts the hero left silver coins for food. He decided to move on, to complete missions to become stronger. The first task was to go to the place marked on the map. But Russell had difficulty with this. The young man did not fully understand how to navigate this area, when suddenly a man shouted about a tour of the volcano with the best guide. And Raymond, without thinking too long, agreed. A group of people went to one of the mountains, where the guide told them about the ordinary, at first glance, Mount Pompello, located opposite, which turned into a volcano because of a special creature that settled here. And the guy looked up at the mountain. Something had changed nature by its mere presence, and only one being was capable of such a thing. It was a red dragon. The guide suddenly growled, and someone even got scared from the unexpectedness. And Russell smiled awkwardly, deciding that it was better for him to go on alone. While the young guide was talking about the peculiarities of Mount Pompello, the main character turned around without attracting unnecessary attention to himself. He decided that he would go in a certain direction, and without doubting his decision, he jumped down from the mountain. It was only when the boy landed in the water that the guide noticed that one person was missing. Russell found himself near a small waterfall. He thought that the reason for his return, the mission and all this could be connected with the dragon. When the hero took out the card and looked at it, a yellow light began to emanate from the object, rising into the air. This light formed into a thick consistency, which unraveled into a thread and went along the water. Now the hero understood what kind of light was supposed to show him the way, and this light line pointed Russell straight behind the waterfall. Raymond took a step back and waved his hands, concentrating the power of the wind in his hand. He created a wind arrow which he threw towards the waterfall, cutting through the streams of water. And then, without thinking, he jumped straight there. The young man combed his hair back as he reached the threshold of the cave, and said that it was no wonder that no one knew about this place. He was advised to create a 3rd circle first, but there were no monsters or even animals visible in that place. Russell took a few steps and was surprised by the columns standing among the cold stone. He placed his palm against one of them, curious to see how old they were. Then he looked to the side and saw the gate. All this time he was thinking what kind of place it was, and finally realized that his main goal was them. The hero slowly headed towards the gate. Suddenly a chill ran through his body, as he felt movement behind him, and a huge shadow fell across his face. Sweat began to run down Russell's neck. Had he forgotten about his life as a mercenary and relaxed too much? After all, if there are no animals or monsters in the area, and there is complete silence, this could only mean one thing. This meant that this was the territory of a powerful predator. And when Russell turned sharply, the nose of a Komodo dragon was right in front of his face. Seeing the movement, the animal opened its mouth and let out a powerful roar. This was a kind of warning, after which the monitor lizard struck. Russell managed to jump back, concentrating magical power in the aura. He didn't know what to do, because to kill this monster, 2 squads of mercenaries were needed. When the young man landed, he decided that all he could do was run. So Russell used the magic of the 2nd circle, forming an arrow of lightning in his hands. The Komodo dragon growled again, its eyes flashing in response to the danger. And just as the animal was about to move forward, Russell abruptly threw an arrow at the monitor lizard. The electric discharges paralyzed the monster, acting as a kind of shackle on its face. In this way, Raymond was able to gain time and ran straight to the gate. But the standing statues abruptly blocked his way. telling him that he must prove himself worthy of entering. Russell got angry and cursed, because this was the only chance to escape. The boy froze, hearing a powerful roar behind him, and slowly turned his head. He realized that he couldn't get through, so the hero decided to create his own path. His body was ablaze with fiery energy, his eyes glowed a draconic yellow, and he created a fiery screw. At that moment, the ruby hidden inside the door came forward and caught fire. The monitor lizard, seeing this glow behind him, froze. He slowed down abruptly, changing his mind about attacking, and the hero drew his arrow, not understanding why the monster had stopped. The monitor lizard rose to its full height on its hind legs, and Russell pointed his hand after the monster. A moment later, the monitor lizard landed on its paws and seemed to bow to the hero, bending its head in front of him. This shocked Russell even more. He took a slow step back, and the spears of the statues blocking the way to the gate parted. They told him that Raymond had proven his worth, and the ruby began to shine with a blinding light. When the hero turned around, everything around was filled with a white glow, blinding him. The guy grabbed his head, which was hurting. Russell was in no hurry to open his eyes. But when I did this, making sure that nothing was blinding my cornea, I saw my reflection on the ice. He sat on the icy floor, surrounded by golems, wondering where he was. He realized that just now it was teleportation magic, because moments ago he was in a cave. Russell looked back and saw a huge magical pipe suspended and chained. A red notification appeared in front of the guy with a mission to defeat all the ice golems and pass the trial of fire. The young man did not immediately understand what kind of golems were being discussed, until he heard characteristic sounds. He turned around abruptly and saw how the statues standing peacefully in the ice hall began to be covered with ice. Their eyes, as if activating, lit up red. Russell stood in the middle of the hall surrounded by these golems, not believing that he had to defeat them all alone. He pulled his hand away and concentrated on forming fire, cursing as it was too cruel. The hero threw a fireball at one of the ice golems in hopes of melting it. The young man knew that to kill the golem, he had to melt its core. However, his fire spit did not accomplish this task. It only scratched the ice. Russell gritted his teeth, voicing his indignation as to what kind of ice these monsters were made of. He thought that if fire didn't work, he would try wind. But for some reason, his spell stopped working. And at that moment, the golem swung both icy hands to strike. Russell thrust his hand forward, calling down lightning. But instead of a full blow, he only managed to cause small electrical discharges. The young man barely managed to dodge the ice attack without getting hurt. However, some of the fragments hit his head, and Raymond's entire forehead was stained with scarlet liquid. He remembered the notice that said he had passed the fire test. Could he really only use fire spells? All this time, while Russell was trying to figure out how to act, he simultaneously dodged attacks and unsuccessfully tripped over a stone. The hero stumbled and was pushed against the wall. The guy winced in pain, but managed to put his hand out to avoid hitting his head. Things were bad. The ice golems had him cornered and were slowly approaching to destroy their target. Russell had his hand on his shoulder, his body shaking. He said, "What a terrible hobby." His face was bruised. His eyelids were closing from fatigue. The young man raised his hand to wipe the sweat and blood from his forehead, and it left an imprint on his hand. Russell had no choice anyway. He activated the fire screw, which he was going to use against the monitor lizards. At that moment, the golems came too close to him, and the hero's body burst into flames. Russell told himself that he could handle it and quickly fired several fire arrows. Even after the blow, the golems continued to move towards him for some time, but more slowly. Russell seized the moment and attacked again, a powerful flash of fire piercing the icy bodies of the monsters through and through. And several golems fell apart, falling to the floor. Raymond was breathing heavily, but continued to hold his left hand so that he would have the strength to create new spells. There are still 2 ice monsters left, but at this rate the hero will soon run out of mana. The boy bit his lower lip nervously, thinking that there had to be another way. He ran forward as the remaining golems continued to attack, making it harder to dodge. To destroy all this ice at once, you need to focus your force on one point. Russell's eyes widened, remembering that the answer was in concentration. First, he needed to move away to use the spell, which he did. He then moved his palms forward and began to form an arrow of fire, and used the enhancement form to make the arrow impressive enough for this attack. Afterwards, I added fire screws using the replication formula. Russell was terribly focused. He had too little time. Finally, he spread his hands, combining all the spells together. The compression formula allowed him to fit all the arrows and propellers together. At that moment, the golem came too close, and Russell cursed, but he couldn't release that blast of collected attacks right now. Russell screamed, begging for it to unite, putting all his strength into it. He threw it at the monster, and all the magic spells combined right in the air. The lava flow melted half of the monster's bodies, and fiery liquid flowed down the golem's legs. The attack created a huge hole in the ice monster, causing it to stagger forward and fall to the floor, shattering into pieces. Russell stopped, holding in his hand the flaming spear he had managed to make. A notification appeared in front of him, informing him that Russell's understanding of the fire element had exceeded the limit. He felt it. A power close to the fifth circle. Even just holding the spear took a huge amount of effort. Raymond shouted to himself to attack and ran forward. The remaining golems ran towards him at the same time. Because of their height and bulk, their movements were slower, so the hero managed to run around each one and pierce them with a spear. But that was not all. There seemed to be no end to these monsters. Russell landed right in the circle of monsters, assessing the situation. Only 4 left. With one sharp swing, he cut 2 in half, leaving exactly the same number left. The hero dodged the ice strike and clutched the fiery spear with both hands. If Raymond destroys this monster with one hit, he will have some mana left for the next one. Exhaling loudly, the guy cut the monster in half in a jump. His breathing was ragged, and it was becoming more and more difficult to move with each passing second, but his body was still under control. While he was standing there, the monster took advantage of the moment and struck with its wide, icy hand, throwing the guy back. Russell gritted his teeth, clutching his spear tightly. If it weren't for it to help block the attack, he might have died. There was very little mana left, and the fire gradually began to weaken in the middle of the weapon. Raymond found the strength to rise and gripped his spear tightly, the weakening spell meaning he had 1 strike left. The hero walked close to the golem and waved his hand, asking for it to work. Focusing on the monster, Russell shouted for the spear to hit and pierce the golem. Left unarmed, the young man slowly raised his head to make sure. And indeed, the spear pierced the ice right through. There was a feeling of relief. The hero said that he could do it. His body suddenly felt heavy and his legs were pulled towards the floor. His eyes rolled back. The guy fell down, losing consciousness. The chains broke, and the horn that was hanging fell. The mission was accomplished, and this thing of the Forgotten King caught fire. It was the hero's reward. To obtain this item, Russell had to travel into the memories of a forgotten king. The white light teleported him to another place, and after a while Russell woke up. However, his hands were bound with chains. His head felt too heavy. Seeing the notifications, the hero thought about whether this was a reward, as if they were going to torture him. Soon, Russell heard a voice saying that the one who had passed the test of fire and achieved the consciousness of a higher being was worthy of a reward. The young man felt as if his head would burst. The voice announced that it would grant the hero a fragment of the king, and a fiery horn appeared directly above him. And then he rushed at the guy, who got scared and jerked, trying to free himself, but it was useless. The Forgotten King's heavy horn pierced Russell's stomach, and the young man doubled over in pain. He couldn't even scream, but only made a muffled sound full of pain. The object pierced the boy's body, exploding with white light inside, the glow of which even came out of his eyelids. Raymond screamed helplessly. He could do nothing and think of nothing. A red dragon appeared behind him, and a voice told him what he needed to use the power he had received for. Then everything disappeared, and the boy found himself washed up on the shore. He rose to his feet, lost in space again, not aware of where he was. And when I looked back, I realized that I was in the Maldives again. The hero put his hand on his forehead, trying to remember what happened. The notifications told him that he had reached the limit by using the Horn of the Forgotten King. The extra mana could be used in the future. The fire had reached an advanced level. Then Russell decided to check it out and squeezed his hand. Suddenly such a powerful energy began to emanate from it that he didn't even immediately realize that it was his. He saw how close he was to the 4th circle. The hero sighed with relief, because the reward made up for all the suffering he had to go through. Someone behind him said that he was glad to meet the young man here. The guy turned around and saw Miss Daria Snow White, which couldn't help but surprise him. The woman explained that she felt a surge of mana and decided to take a look. The professor handed the hero a cocktail, saying that after that she saw him. Russell smiled and thanked the woman, saying that he did not expect to meet the head of the tower here. The professor's eyes glowed blue. She saw that Raymond was almost creating the 4th circle of magic, and his mana was even purer than at their first meeting. The professor was once again convinced that this student was a genius. After taking a sip of the drink, Russell placed it on the wooden counter and asked the professor what brought her here. The woman replied that few people knew, but this was her homeland, and then took a sip of her cocktail. Seeing the student's confusion, she explained that she came back here every summer, then asked what Russell was doing here. Looking at the professor, the guy decided that it was too early to tell her the truth, and he said, putting his hand to his chest, that he wanted to see the world. The woman replied that it was understandable then, but she herself thought about whether it was worth testing his abilities. She asked if he would like to help her a little then. The hero didn't have time to answer, when suddenly the professor snapped her finger and a cloak appeared on the young man from fire magic. He saw a symbol on the mantle. It was the distinctive sign of the fire tower. Smiling, Daria Snow told the student not to worry because he could handle it. Then a new system window appeared in front of the hero, with the task of completing Professor Daria's test, fighting with pirates in the harbor. She told him that in Endymion there was a strict ban on slavery. Slave ships are forbidden to dock on these lands. But unfortunately there are those who violate these prohibitions. And this someone wants to drop anchor in the Maldives. The guy agreed, and at night they went to the ship in a small boat. Daria said that she could have handled it herself. But her goal is to save people and capture the ship. And for this, she needs a detailed plan. Russell encouraged her by saying that they needed to attack unexpectedly, and the woman said that he was quick on the uptake. The hero himself thought that if the head of the fire tower asks for help, then in a normal situation, hundreds of willing magicians will come running. But since she asked him specifically, it meant it was a test. As they approached the ship, the professor created a fog so that they would not be noticed immediately. This atmospheric phenomenon, although it appeared quickly, looked natural. Daria warned Russell that this might be too much for him. But the path of a defender will never be easy. She smiled, summing up that such was the fate of magicians. And then she jumped into the air on her heels, saying that she would distract the pirates' attention, and Russell should save the people at that time. The boy watched as the professor rose higher and higher into the air, thinking about the words she had said. The woman literally floated in the air, which required incredible concentration. Having risen to a decent distance above the ship, Daria stopped, saying out loud that it would be good here. She released her power and her pupils disappeared, her eyes glowing white. A white and purple sphere formed around the professor, and the woman gave the child a sign to begin the action. There was a commotion on board. The pirates shouted that they were being attacked. The leader ordered to move faster. The men loaded their weapons and raised their crossbows into the air. Hundreds of arrows flew into the sky, but Daria Snow's sphere absorbed them. Then the pirate cursed, seeing how the arrows did not reach the magician. The woman called them fools, asking how they dared to hide here. She summoned a fire spell and blew lightly on her palm to make the flames fall individually. Daria asked if the pirates' strength was comparable to their stupidity. The men did not immediately understand what kind of attack this was. One of the pirates tried to put out the fire with his foot. However, it grew more and more, eventually becoming sticky and catching on shoes. The pirate screamed, trying to remove his leg, but it was useless. From these little lights appeared little forms, ready to carry out the orders of their mistress. It was a signature spell by Daria Snow White that summoned flame dwarves, while the pirate's attention was occupied by these fiery creatures. Russell quietly climbed onto the ship. He hid, seeing the chaos and shouts on board urging him to move faster. Raymond immediately recognized this spell of Daria's that destroyed the entire palace. The pirates took out their weapons, swung their swords, sabers, and axes. However, this had no effect on the fire dwarves. And Russell, seeing this, would never have thought that he would be able to witness this spell with his own eyes. The fire creature, enraged by the man's attack, struck the pirate's leg with its weapon. The man's body instantly burst into flames so that he had no chance of salvation. Russell stood frozen, watching with his mouth open, as all of this happened in a matter of seconds. The pirates were frightened when they saw their comrade, and one of them asked what it had turned into. The hero turned his head towards the door to the cabin. Now he had no time to be surprised. He walked up to the door and opened it. His main goal now was to save people while the professor distracted the pirates. Hearing some kind of stomping and commotion on board, the pirate guarding the prisoners asked himself in surprise, like, what was going on there? The slaves began to rejoice that the guards had certainly arrived, and so they were saved. Then the pirate stood up and sharply struck the metal bars of the grate with his saber. He swung his weapon again, and shouted that no matter what happened, they would never escape from them. And the prisoners huddled tighter, trembling. The pirate asked if he was understood, and at that moment the hero's hand suddenly grabs him by the neck. Raymond summoned the power of lightning. The man arched back as multiple bolts of electricity shot through his body. He was all burnt and smoking, his hair stood on end, his eyes rolled back. Only then did Russell remove his hand. As he thought, some of the pirates did not go upstairs. One of the prisoners put his hand on the bars and asked, addressing the young man as you, whether he had really come to save them. Russell smiled and replied that yes, but until they dealt with all the pirates, it would be safest to stay here. The woman sat on the floor and bowed, saying that God had heard her requests. Raymond looked around to see how many people were there. He was very surprised when his gaze fell on one of the bars. There, with his knees pulled up to his chest, sat a little boy, and this shocked the hero. Did pirates really sell even children? Russell gritted his teeth angrily and cursed, calling the pirates bastards and scum. He froze when he heard footsteps and men asking who was standing there. The pirates saw the young man and his comrade lying unconscious on the floor next to him. One of them thrust his saber forward, ordering them to catch this bastard, and the pirates simultaneously ran towards Raymond. The boy used lightning magic again, concentrating the power into an electric ball. He said that he would stop them. The magic of the second circle, chain lightning, allowed the pirates to be attacked and stunned at the same time. The cabin with the prisoners was filled with smoke coming from the people pierced by the discharges.